Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that I checked out from my local library. I used their ebook sort of loan system. So don't forget to patronize your local libraries as they have cool books and they also have interesting loan systems, and you can also check out Audible books from time to time depending on how advanced your library may be. Libraries are cool like that. And today I will be talking about a book that focuses on pedophilia in sassy teenagers. I am referring to Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, which was published in 1955. For those who don't know, Vladimir Nabokov, although his name is somewhat well known, I have a feeling a lot of people don't know about the body of his work. He was a Russian author who lived throughout the 1900s. He was known primarily for writing Lolita, but he did write a couple of other books and essays and short stories as well. And he was known for writing sort of about individualism and those kinds of ideas, some of which you see in the book that I'm going to be talking about today. He also noted, even in the afterword in this book, that he wasn't so focused on what the author is trying to say or what the point of a story is. More, he was just telling a story, getting it out of his system. And it just so happened that the story he told had some themes. Although, again, like he notes that like the why isn't so much as important as what happens. So it's going to be weird when I do, an analysis on this, because I thought that was funny. As it was like, I'm trying to figure out what he's trying to say here. And, he's like, maybe that's not so important. I disagree, but also I can understand where he's coming from. What's also interesting is that his family was, they had to flee to Europe during the communist revolution in Russia. I don't know which side his parents were on, but that is an interesting bit that he lived through that. And so as a result, he went to Cambridge and other universities like that, and I think he found his way to America eventually and spoke out about Stalin's Russia, and I think he was for the Vietnamese War in the 1960s, which is unfortunate, but you can't be on the right side of history all the time. I think a lot of his work, or like this work in particular, it was kind of controversial, especially for what he's talking about. But as I'll point out in the analysis section, I don't think it's as controversial as people make it out to be. And so without further ado, let's talk about Lolita. I will be doing spoilers. This book was written in 1955, but If you intend to read Lolita, and I am going to recommend it, I recommend that you go read it and then come back and check out this video so that we can have a conversation. Otherwise, without further ado, let's do the summary, the analysis, and we will move on from there. So Lolita focuses on the character of Humbert Humbert. He is a middle-aged European man who, at the start of the story, is writing his confession. It's been noted that he's dead already, and he's writing a confession about his many crimes as they pertain to a young girl named Lolita, or Dolores, which is her actual name. Although he's using pseudonyms here to protect identity, I think. This is presented with an introduction from a fictional psychologist who notes that Humbert's case is going to become a pretty important one for other psychologists going forward. Humbert writes about a relationship when he was a teenager with a young girl named Annabelle. They were pretty hot and heavy. She was to be his first sexual encounter, but unfortunately she died of typhus, and he developed an obsession with girls like Annabelle as a result, even into adulthood. He labeled them as nymphets, which is like sexual young girls who aren't too sexual, because that would be off-putting, and who haven't quite made it to the young adult stages of puberty yet, which is just a way of him justifying his bizarre pedophilia. He he's clearly a monster in this story. We also learn of his many career failures. Although he's very successful in a niche field, he's not as popular as he wants to be by his own admission, and so he feels like a real failure there. He also talks about his marriage to a woman named Valerie. He kind of enforces his weird fetishes upon her, and kind of disregards her most of the time, and she ends up leaving him for a Russian man, which drives him to anger, but he doesn't do anything about it. He then goes on to America, doing work for various universities and whatnot, and he ends up staying with a landlord named Charlotte Hayes and her daughter. Charlotte seems to like Humbert, but he doesn't feel the same way about her, and he develops an obsession with her daughter, Dolores, or as Humbert calls her, Lolita. He becomes very obsessed with her, focusing on touching her, wanting to give her kisses, which she seems to react positively to, mainly because he seems like a father figure to her. It also seems, it doesn't seem like, but Humbert straight up says he wants to sedate Lolita and probably also Charlotte, and while they're both asleep, he wants to fondle and have their way have his way with Lolita, in an effort to protect her innocence. But he's still raping her regardless, so he's deluding himself there. Lolita goes off to camp, which saddens Humbert, and in the process, Charlotte gives Humbert an ultimatum: either marry him or marry her because she is very much in love with him, or leave the house and never return because she can't stand to see him, and if he's not going to be with her. He ends up deciding to marry her because he wants to be closer to Lolita, but this backfires in that Charlotte finds the letters and notes that he's written about Lolita and threatens to publish them and send them off to people so that he is exposed as the weird pedophile that he is. And Charlotte is unfortunately killed on her way to mail those letters, and Humbert picks them up, rips them up, and then goes and picks up Lolita from camp and starts driving around the country in motels. He eventually tells Lolita that her mother is dead, and he has sex with Lolita in one of the hotels. She seems open to the idea at first. I think it's just like, ooh, this strange, unusual situation I find myself in. But she quickly goes frustrated. And what's even funnier is Humbert finds out he's not Lolita's first sexual encounter, as she experimented at camp with other young girls, as well as the one boy who was hanging around the camp. So he doesn't get to be her first in that regard. Again, they go on a road trip. Lolita grows increasingly frustrated, back-talking Humbert throughout the time. Humbert grows scared that Lolita is going to out him and expose their relationship. And Lolita even begins crying herself to sleep, showing that she has been devastated by what Humbert is doing to her and having sex with her repeatedly and not really giving her the opportunity to leave. Eventually, they move to a city called Beardsley, where Lolita stays at a private school. Unfortunately, Humbert is very controlling and overprotective of her, doesn't really let her hang out with friends, and she begins suffering academically. And again, just trying to make Humbert miserable in any way that she can. So they go on another road trip at Lolita's request, but they begin being followed by a guy who Humbert calls Trap. He believes him to be a cousin of his, but it's actually a man named Claire Quilty who is obsessed with Lolita as well. And when Lolita stays at a hospital, Claire Quilty picks her up, takes her to Hollywood, and but unfortunately exploits her in the same way, asking or requesting her to star in porn movies and be abusive in that regard. Humbert doesn't know where Lolita has gone. He's kind of lost and sad about everything. He develops a relationship with a woman named Rita, but it's clear that they're both kind of broken, and Rita isn't doing too well mentally. And when he receives a letter from Lolita, he straight up abandons her. And then he goes and finds out that Lolita is pregnant, and she is getting married to a man named Dick Schiller. And she's requesting some money from her family's estate that she believes she's entitled to. And Humbert goes and gives her the money, finds out that it was Claire Quilty who abducted her, and then he he asked Lolita to come with him to travel the country once more with him, which Lolita says no. She is very clearly angry with him, but she says it very gentle, but this still makes Humbert angry, and he decides to leave, saddened as a result, and he ends up going and killing Claire Quilty at his mansion, gets arrested and sent to prison where everyone finds out about his crimes. And as the story comes to a close, he notes that he is making Lolita immortal, and people will continue to fall in love with her, showing that he's kind of like exposing more about Lolita and making her life even worse than it already is, and that's where it ends. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Lolita. Just a whole bunch worth talking about as it pertains to the abuse that Humbert is delivering to Lolita, and even the character of Humbert himself. I do think that Nabokov has written a well-rounded, if awful, human being in Humbert Humbert, who has many like parallels to people in real life when it comes to abuse and sexual assault and things like that. So like one of the themes that Nabokov is working with is self-awareness, specifically as it pertains to Humbert. Because Humbert seems to be both self-aware of his behavior, of his gross behavior, as well as kind of ignorant of it, not really aware that what he's doing is harming people. Or maybe if he's like aware, he doesn't care that he's harming people. Because he hides behind the law, especially cultural sort of practices and science in this story. When he talks about the law, he notes like, oh, in some parts of the country, it's okay for me to do what I'm doing, and I'm not actually Lolita's father, so there's nothing wrong here. And he talks about how in other cultures, relationships with young girls are perfectly acceptable, and there's a science behind all this because men like me are attracted to young women. And then he starts talking about the idea of nymphets, really like BS kind of science. Like even for 1955, the time that Humbert was living in, it doesn't make any sense. Like there's nothing back it up. It's French science, and Humbert is stupid for trying to pass this off as actually real. But I think that's interesting because he knows his behavior is wrong. So he's trying to back it up as much as he can to say, see, what I'm doing is okay. I know you're mad about it, but but understand that this is something that just generally happens in many parts of the world, which is really bold on Nabokov's part, because he's saying, oh, if you have a problem with Humbert Humbert, just know there are many other people like him, and the law allows that to happen. Cultural practices allow that to happen. So why don't you do something about it? And I think Nabokov is really clever for that. But at the same time, Humbert Humbert seems very unaware that this is like wrong, because he believes that this love is real, that he genuinely loves Lolita. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. The elation with which the vision of new delights filled me was not horrible but pathetic. I qualify it as pathetic. Pathetic because despite the insatiable fire of my venerable appetite, I intended, with the most fervent force and foresight, to protect the purity of that 12-year-old child. And it's interesting there, because you see both the awareness and the not awareness, because he realizes that it's pathetic to desire to protect this child, to be so caring of this child, especially because she's not his child. So I think he's aware of his pathetic nature, and he tries to avoid it at all costs. But at the same time, he's not, because he keeps saying I'm trying to protect the innocence of this child. Like at the beginning, it's like I'm gonna do it while she's asleep, and that'll be that. And then later, it's like, oh well, she's enjoying this too. Like we're both having a good time, so I'm protecting her innocence by not just leaving her on the side of the road. And it's clear he's deluded himself into believing that this is okay, that he's unaware that he's a monster in this regard. And he says, oh, I love her, but this isn't real love. She's her guardian. He's supposed to be in a position of trust and power, and using that power well, and he does not. He does not do that very well. She cannot consent to being in love with him or consent to a relationship with him because she is a minor, in all respects. And I know things were different in 1955, but that's, it's perfectly fine judging, this given how recent it sort of is. But also, this pedophilia is gross in any age, I would say. What's more interesting is how Nabokov gets at the fact that Humbert has had breakdowns before. Humbert even glosses over it when he's talking about I had to stay at a mental institution for a couple of years here or there, and I don't think he's aware that his mental health isn't the best. He's covered in blood or he's covered in dirt and he doesn't really do anything about it, It's just he's doing really well at covering it up and hiding it, but he's not even aware that his mental health has been deteriorating for years at this point. And when he confronts Quilty, you see a little bit more of that unawareness or that unwillingness to confront his own beastly behavior, because he shoots Quilty, and then before he does that, he says, "You have destroyed Lolita's life." And Quilty's like, "No, well, I didn't do that. You also did that." And so Quilty might have done that, but for his part, Humbert also ruined Lolita's life. And his shooting of Quilty is just it's sort of a silent acceptance that he is responsible for hurting Lolita, but he doesn't want to say it out loud because that would just completely annihilate him in his his mental state as well. Another element of the story that I really like is how Lolita is extraneous in this story. She's not even the focus. I don't think she's the real focus of Humbert's love. He says she is, but it's clear there are other things that he cares about, that this love brings to him and he values more. Humbert's obsession is more about Annabelle, because she died when he was young and she was to be his first sexual encounter, and she was so perfect to him that he just had to have other people who were like Annabelle. So when he looks at Lolita, he doesn't see Lolita, not really. He sees Annabelle, which is a fascinating sort of nuance in this story. I like how Nabokov is able to capture that, how we're all trying to sort of, in some loves at least, we're trying to capture maybe a former glory. And for Humbert, his life has been a real mess. He's kind of pathetic, extremely pathetic. He's dealt with nothing but failures his whole life. By his own admission, he's successful, but not as much as he'd like to be. He's really only getting published in niche journals, and he doesn't seem to have a lot of power or prestige. So it seems like from this relationship with Lolita, he's getting a lot of power. He's able to exert control over somebody else, which he hasn't really done before. After all, his first wife left him, and now he's making it so Lolita can't leave him. And so for him, and for a lot of people who are like Humbert Humbert, abusers, rapists and whatnot, it's not so much about being with this person. It's more that you have power now, that you have control, and it makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. And I really like how Nabokov does that, because he's able to write such a pathetic, lowly, bottom feeder like Humbert, who seems to get off not just with the idea of that Lolita is a beautiful young woman, young girl, more precise, but that he's getting power from all of it. That he's getting control that he's never really had before. It's also important to talk about the effects on Lolita, because I think Nabokov does a great job of showing those effects, and how Lolita is hurt by all of this. Because he continues to rape her throughout the story. It's not just one time. Throughout the road trip, he continues to have sex with her, and she's not able to escape. She's kind of stuck with him, and he's even told her, if you try to run away, you'll just be put in as a ward of the state, and that'll make your life really miserable. It devastates Lolita mentally, all the frustration she's dealing with, all the sadness. She cries herself to sleep at night. A lot of inner turmoil happening throughout the entire story, that Humbert isn't really aware of or isn't willing to see, because if he does see it, then he realizes that he's ruined this woman forever. And allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "By rubbing all this in, I succeeded in terrorizing Lo, who, despite a certain brashness of manner and spurts of wit, was not as intelligent a child as her IQ might suggest. But if I managed to establish that background of shared secrecy and shared guilt, I was much less successful in keeping her in good humor. Every morning during our year-long travels, I had to devise some expectation, some special point in space and time for her to look forward to, for her to survive till bedtime. Otherwise deprived of a shaping and sustaining purpose, the skeleton of her day sagged and collapsed. And that's really interesting because it gets at the fact that this woman is deteriorating. All she has to look forward to is what's happening on that day, the little gifts that her captor is giving her, and she, like, other than that, like, everything is gone for her. She has her mom is dead. She's no longer around any friends, and she's forced to travel with this monster. And so, like, you get a hint of that inner turmoil, which I think Humbert understands when he sees pregnant Lolita at the end of the story, kind of aware that he got these glimpses into her, but he never really knew her true inner state, and that's unfortunate for Lolita, because like, even when she's in Beardsley, like, she's still having bad grades, not doing well academically, poor friendship because Humbert is being controlling. And even after leaving, like, she's still affected because Claire Quilty exploits her when he gets his hands on her. And you see at the very end, like, Lolita's pregnant at 17 years old, which is never a good sign, to be pregnant at such a young age. So for her, Lolita's life has been completely wrecked. I don't think there's any hope for recovery for being exploited and abused for so long in your formative years. And this is really condemning of Humbert Humbert. Many people say this glorifies, pedophilia, or glorifies Humbert's, lecherous behavior. But no, Nabokov is very clearly condemning this evil, despicable, pathetic little wretch of a man for taking this woman, abusing his power and trust and guardianship, and just using it to feel more fulfilled about himself. It's a wreck. It's terrible. Like, Humbert didn't get what he wanted as a child, as a teenager, and he made everyone suffer for it as a result. There are other amazing elements of the story, such as the good characterization and understanding Humbert Humbert, as well as Lolita. A lot of people, or not a lot of people, but Nabokov even says that a lot of people complained that there weren't that many likable characters in this story. And I have to say, Lolita is an amazing, fascinating character. Like, she's sassy and fun, and Humbert Humbert takes that away from her, and so she's a good character, but she isn't one for long because Humbert is such a monster. I also like the writing, especially with the use of adjectives and alliteration here. Nabokov is very descriptive in his writing, and I think this story is richer as a result of that. And I also think the timeless display of abuse here is really good. Like, this story fits kind of in any generation. Like, this is set in 1955, but if you moved it forward a couple of years or a couple decades, I think it would still work. Nabokov is clearly demonstrating, the selfishness and depravity of abusers, and the effects that it has on people. And I feel like, that's something you could see in this day and age with a lot of people who are like, I don't believe the age of consent should be as high as it is. Let's make it a little earlier in a person's life, which is awful. So really good writing on that part, and I think it makes me enjoy the story more for being something that kind of has this sort of timeless and universal quality to it, given that it's relating to such an awful act that a human can do to another person. And then I do think that there is one problem with this story, one flaw, in that it kind of slows down after Lolita leaves, and it kind of drags a little bit there. Not too much, though. I think Nabokov's writing is enough to really get it over that hump, but it is a noticeable slowdown that is the weakest part of an otherwise excellently written and excellently paced story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. As you can see by the length of this video, I did quite enjoy this. It's probably going to be one of the best that I've read in 2023. And so I'm really glad that I finally got to read it, especially after all this time. I'd heard about it in high school, but never got to it. And I don't think I would have enjoyed it in high school. I don't think it's something that I can truly enjoy until a little bit later in life, once I've seen a little bit more of the world. Given that I lived in rural Iowa, I probably wouldn't have understand, or I thought I would have been one of those people who'd been like, wow, this is glorifying pedophilia or something like that. But yeah, I think it's really good, and I'm going to recommend it. And if you read it before, or you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a further discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to get out to those people who maybe haven't heard of this story or this author before. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird, and I'm not going to make a joke about this at the end because there doesn't seem to be a joke, travels. Farewell.